Here we are in step number 5 of the invisible part sew in hairstyle. In this step, I will show you in detail how to sew on each individual piece of extensions onto your braids for your invisible part. Now that all of your extensions around your head have been sewn, in this step, we're going to concentrate on finishing our style by sewing on our individual pieces of extensions to finish our invisible part closure. So to begin, I want to talk a little bit about the needles that I have prepared. On my table, I have a lot of needles. You can use only one needle if you like, but using multiple needles helps you to continue to flow as you are sewing on your extensions. The thread on these needles are short because as I am sewing on my pieces for my invisible part closure, I want to make sure that I have a small amount of thread to control the amount of tangles and knots that can happen. But when I am sewing throughout my entire head, I wind up literally 2 to 3 feet of thread to help me to continually flow and sew without having to make multiple stops because I've ran out of thread on my needle. So I highly suggest that you use many needles to achieve your style so that you don't have to reload them more than you need to. So now we are off to actually closing up our invisible part closure. At this point, you want to take your extensions that you have. Since you will be only using small amounts at once, you do not have to worry about your hair running out because you really won't use this much hair. So now you just want to take one of your ends of your extensions and you want to place it on one of your first braids that's closest to your hairline. We will start on the right side. I will measure out a piece for this from this track piece, and then I will sew it onto the braid. You will notice that as you sew up all of your braids, it will show the illusion that the only thing is your scalp showing with all of your hair sewn. So just to make this simple, we're going to go one at a time. I'm going to take my extensions, place it on the braid furthest to my hairline, and measure it up. So once I measure it there, I'm going to measure it here until I stop before the weft. So at that point, that is where you want to cut your weft of your extension. You can overestimate just a little bit to make sure you cover all the space that you need. So now that marks the spot where I want to cut. I'm going to take my scissors and trim that portion. You slide your scissors in and just go ahead and make a quick snip. So now we're going to measure this piece back to our first braid to see how it looks. And it still overextends a little bit. When we sew this piece onto our braid alongside it, we can just trim off the excess to make sure it fits just perfectly. So now what you want to do with this piece is take your needle and thread and make sure to secure 2 knots on here so you can begin sewing the piece onto your braid. Doing your invisible part closure is the same thing as if you're sewing all of your extensions on. The only difference is that we're just focusing on a little amount of hair at a time. So as you sew on the amount of hair to finish with your braid, you go on to the next braid and you do the same process. So now I'm just gonna get my needle and thread ready at the beginning of my track piece. So I go through the weft. I'm going to do my knot technique. Oops, the knot came out. I'm just going to retie that knot. Open the thread. Once, twice, and pull through. And that is why you want to cut that excess thread that's above the knot to make sure that it doesn't stick out from your style. Now we're going to create our second knot at the very beginning of the extension piece so that we can begin to sew. So I'm going to go around the thread once, twice, and pull through. Now the needle and thread is ready for me to begin sewing it on my braid. So just as you've done throughout your head, you're going to do the same process. You're just sewing it on a smaller section of braid. So I'm going to bring this up to the beginning of my braid here. And I don't want to overextend past my braid. I want it just snug and as perfect as I can right at the beginning of my braid. Now at this point, the same thing applies. You take your needle, you go through the braid, and then you go through the weft as well. So I'm gonna go through the braid, through the weft, and then I'm gonna pull the needle all the way through and create my knot. So I'm gonna grab that thread, open it up, wrap it around once, twice, and pull through. And there's my first knot. Remember, at the beginning of your track piece and at the end, you want to create 2 knots. So here's my second knot once again. Under the braid, under the weft this time, pull through. And then my knot technique. Once, twice, pull the needle through, and there's my second knot. Pull it right down there. So now I'm just gonna do single knots along the way until I make my last stitch there, which will be 2 knots. Under the braid, under the weft, pull through. Once around a string, twice around a string, and pull the needle through. So now here I am with my last stitch there, and I'm gonna make 2 stitches. So first, let me go ahead and take my scissors and trim off this excess weft here. So I'm just gonna go up here to estimate how much I need. About right there. And cut that piece off. And now I'm gonna make sure to go under the braid and through the weft, since that's the end of my weft piece. Under the braid, through the weft, my knot, once, twice, pull through, and then do it a second time at the end. Under the braid, under the weft, pull through, knot technique, and pull my needle straight through. So now that you've done that, I just like to open the thread just a little bit to tighten it up just a notch. And then I take my scissors and cut the thread off from the actual piece. And there you see you've sewn your first piece of hair for your actual invisible part. As you notice, there's a very small gaping hole there, and you do not have to worry because as you stack more and more pieces of hair, it will look extremely flawless and seamless. So as you stack more extensions, for example, I'm gonna grab my next one and put it back up to that second braid, you can see that it covers the first braid. So as you stack up more and more and more and more, you will notice that the hair will flow downwards to show your scalp, and the same thing will happen on the other side. So now we're gonna go to our second braid. The same thing applies. You're gonna measure it. You're gonna take your scissors and cut that piece. And now you're gonna prepare your needle and thread on your track piece through the weft. Do your knot technique. Put it around the weft a second time. And do your knot technique. Now I have a little knot there, just a little bubble of thread. I'm just gonna snip it off. Now you're going to begin sewing this to your second braid. So I'm just smoothing the hairs out of the way, some stray hairs. Bring it up to my braid. Now I'm going to begin sewing. I'm going to go directly underneath the beginning of my braid here and through the weft. Pull the needle through. Create my knot. once, twice, and pull through. And I do it a second time since it's the beginning of my extension. Under the weft. The same knot technique. And now continue with a single knot here. And then a double knot at the very end, under the braid through the weft. Create your knot. And then make your second knot again. Then I'm going to open up the thread just to tighten it just a notch. And then you're going to trim with your scissors. And there you go, your second piece. Just going to continue to work your way up. And you will notice that if there is a small gap in between your hair here, it starts to close up as you add more pieces of hair along the way. So now that you have finished sewing on all your individual pieces for your invisible part section, last I will show you how to create your closure for your invisible part style. To finish your invisible part style, you need to create your final closure and sew it onto your head. The materials you will need to do that will be a piece of your extensions, needle and thread, scissors, a comb, and you will need flat irons to flatten your closure before you sew it onto your head. So with the amount of extensions that you need, you want to take your extensions and grab one end and measure across the opening that is left on top of your head. So this is about how much space from one side to another it is for my closure piece. To make sure you have the perfect amount of extensions, you want to double that amount, which I have here, and trim it off your extension or track piece. This will serve as your closure piece. So to create your closure piece, what we will do is always start our closure the way we always knot it. You go through the weft, create your knot with your knot technique, and then go around the weft again to create your second knot. So we're going to take the needle and thread. You're going to go through the weft, create your knot, then you're going to create a second knot. So now from this point on, there will be only one knot along the way until you reach the very end of your track piece. Remember, at the very end, you go through the weft, and you want to make sure that you do a double knot at the end as well. So from this point, what you want to do is go ahead and actually roll your extension in a certain direction. So if you're starting on the left side, you're going to roll to the right because your extension will start to actually form a circle. So you're going to continue to roll the extension, only one at a time, make your stitch, roll it again, make your stitch. You're going to do that throughout this piece until you've reached the very edge to create your circle. So to show you how that's done, I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to roll it to the side just once. And this time I'm going to go underneath all of the wefts and make one single knot. And now I'm going to continue to roll in that direction until I finish. So I'm going to roll a little bit. Then I'm going to take my needle, put it underneath all of the wefts, and create a knot. Roll it again underneath all of the wefts and create your knot. Now at this last moment, you're gonna go through the weft, and then you're gonna go underneath all of the wefts and create your knot and do it once again. Through that last weft, underneath all the wefts, bring it up, and now you tie your last knot. So now at this moment, what you want to do after you've secured your last knot is to cut the string off from your closure piece. Now from this point, we're going to flip the closure piece over to this side and spread the hair as evenly all around as we possibly can and flatten it as flat as we can with our flat iron. So I'm just going to spread the hair as much as I can all around. I'm going to take your flat iron, insert it underneath, and try your best to be careful. And just go ahead and flatten the weft and the hair. It may take a little working on, but just be careful and continue to flatten it as best as you can. So now my closure piece is finished, and to make sure that it's flat, what you want to do is spread the hair and lay it on the table to make sure that it's flat against the table. Now the point of making sure that your closure is flat is so that when you sew it onto your head, it doesn't stand on top of your head. You want it to lay as flat to your head as possible. So now what you want to do before you begin sewing your closure is to take your closure, turn it around to expose the weft, and you need to connect your needle and thread onto this closure piece to make it easy to sew onto your head. So now I'm going to take my needle and thread, and I'm simply going to scoop up some thread that's already connected onto this closure, put my needle through, and create my knot. Open up the thread once, twice, and pull through. And you want to do this 2 times just to make sure it's secure. Go through the thread again on the closure piece, with your needle. Pull your needle out. Wrap your needle around the string once and twice and pull through. So now your string and your needle is connected to your closure piece. From this point, we can begin to sew the closure piece onto our head. So right before you actually sew your closure piece onto your head, you are going to take your closure piece and secure all of the hair around with a rubber band so that it does not get tangled or in knots. So you're going to turn your closure piece around to let the hairs fall down. You're going to gather all of the hair, making sure to leave the string out. Then you're going to take your rubber band and simply secure it around the hair. Now that that's secure, we're going to begin to sew our closure onto our head. So on my left hand, I have my closure piece, and in my right hand, I have the needle. So what I'm going to do is take the base of my closure and apply that directly on my scalp to begin sewing. So once I place it there, what I want to do is take my needle and either scoop up some thread, hair, or weft from another piece to make sure that the closure is pinned down on top of my head. So making sure that's positioned, I'm going to take my needle, scoop up some hair, and then I'm going to go underneath the closure through a little bit of weft. Pull the needle through and do my knot technique. Now that you've created your first knot, you're going to work your way all the way around your closure piece until you reach that point again. So once again, I'm going to peel the hair back just a little bit to expose the weft. I'm going to pick up either some hair or string or weft of another piece. Pull it through a little bit. Put it through the weft of my closure. Just a little bit of the weft on the outer edge. Push the needle through. And do my knot technique. Once, twice, pull through. So as you can see, it's only held by 2 stitches here. The back has not been sewn down. You're just going to continue to work your way around in little areas at a time to make sure you sew the piece down. So I'm going to go under a little bit of hair, some of the weft from my actual closure piece, push the needle through, and create my knot. Depending on how big or small your closure piece is, will also vary with the amount of knots that you tie around your closure piece. So now we're back here, and I probably have to do 2 or 3 more stitches to secure this side here. I'm gonna dig under a little bit of a braid for my scalp. You can see there. Go underneath some of the weft of the closure. Push the needle through. Create my knot. And now I can feel here that I only have 1 more stitch to do in this spot, just to make sure it's secure. So now I'm going to go underneath some of my hair, some of the weft of the closure piece as well, mainly on the outer edge. Push through the weft, pull the needle out, and create my last knot. Tighten it. Open up the thread just a little bit. It's something that I like to do just to secure it a little bit more. Stretch the thread a little bit. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut the thread off. Now once you remove the rubber band, and comb your hair all the way down around all sides, you have secured your closure piece. In this step, I showed you how to create your closure and also how to sew it onto your head. Remember that creating your closure and installing your closure is an easy process. You just want to make sure that you practice the same sewing techniques that you have been doing with your hair all along. In the next step, step number 6, I will show you how to cut and style your invisible part sewing.